They buried this book for 1,500 years, because it revealed too much truth about angels, demons, and the real reason humanity fell from grace. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about biblical history. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. What I'm about to show you isn't Sunday school material. The Book of Enoch, the most dangerous text ever written, and they made sure you'd never read it. Over the next 1 hour, you're going to discover exactly why church leaders banned this book, the terrifying truth about 200 fallen angels who broke every rule, and the forbidden knowledge they gave humanity that changed everything. But here's what really got them scared. This book connects directly to Revelation, and shows us exactly what's coming next. This isn't some dusty ancient story. This is the blueprint for understanding why our world feels so broken, and what's really happening behind the scenes. And before we dive in, I want to know something from you. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's powerful to see people from every corner of the globe uncovering these hidden truths together. And if this kind of knowledge matters to you, make sure you like this video. It helps this message spread to more people who are ready to wake up. The discovery that shook Christianity. In 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce returns from Ethiopia carrying 3 mysterious manuscripts. What he brought back rocked the foundations of biblical scholarship forever. Bruce had no idea what he was holding. These weren't just any old texts. These were copies of the Book of Enoch, a book that had vanished from the Western world for over 1,000 years. But here's the thing, this wasn't an accident. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had been secretly preserving these texts, while the rest of Christianity pretended they never existed. They knew something the Vatican didn't want you to know. When Bruce brought these manuscripts back to Europe, scholars couldn't believe what they were reading. Here was Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, telling a story that made Genesis look like the condensed version. And get this, the book wasn't just mentioned once in the Bible, it was quoted directly. Jude, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. Word for word from Enoch. So if the apostles were quoting from it, if early church fathers like Justin Martyr and Clement of Alexandria were referencing it, why did it disappear? That's where it gets interesting. The book contained information that made church leaders extremely uncomfortable. It talked about angels in ways that contradicted their carefully crafted theology. It revealed details about the spiritual realm that they didn't want regular people to know. But the real problem was what Enoch said about the end times, and how it lined up perfectly with what's happening right now. James Bruce died in 1794. Never fully understanding the bomb he'd brought back to civilization. The manuscripts sat in libraries for decades, while scholars debated whether they dared to translate them fully. Because once you read what Enoch actually wrote, you can't unsee it. The angels, the giants, the corruption of humanity, the advanced technology given to primitive humans. It all starts to make sense when you realize this book was meant to be the prequel to everything else in Scripture. Remember this moment, because what Bruce didn't know is that these texts had been deliberately hidden for over a millennium, and what we're about to uncover explains exactly why they went to such lengths to bury this truth. Who was Enoch? Now, before we dive into what Enoch wrote, we need to understand who this man actually was, because his identity is the key to why his words carried so much weight, and why they terrified religious authorities. Enoch was the 7th from Adam. Think about that for a second. Only 6 generations separated him from the very beginning of humanity. He wasn't some distant prophet telling stories passed down through centuries. This man lived when the memories of Eden were still fresh. But here's what makes Enoch absolutely unique in all of human history. Genesis 5 verse 24 says something that should stop you dead in your tracks. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He never died. Let that sink in. Out of all the billions of people who have ever lived, only 2 men in the entire Bible never experienced death. Elijah and Enoch. And Enoch came first. But the phrase, walked with God, isn't just poetic language. The Hebrew word used here suggests an intimate, ongoing relationship, like two friends taking a daily stroll together. Enoch had direct access to divine knowledge that no one else possessed. And here's the part that made church leaders sweat. If Enoch never died, if God literally took him up, then his testimony about what he saw in the heavenly realms carried the weight of an eyewitness account. This wasn't folklore, this wasn't allegory, this was a man reporting what he personally experienced. The book claims Enoch was given visions of everything, from the creation of the world, to the final judgment. He saw the fallen angels, he witnessed their rebellion, he watched them corrupt humanity, and he was shown exactly how it all ends. Now imagine you're a church leader in the 4th century, trying to establish religious authority, and here's this ancient text claiming direct revelation from someone who had more intimate access to God than anyone except Adam himself. That's a problem. Because if people believed Enoch's account, they might start questioning why they needed priests and bishops to interpret God's will, when they had access to the unfiltered testimony of a man who literally walked and talked with the Creator. Enoch lived 365 years, not the 900+ years of other patriarchs, almost like God cut his earthly life short because he had a special assignment, to preserve certain knowledge for future generations, knowledge that would be crucial for understanding the end times. If you're already getting chills about what we're uncovering, and you're ready to dig deeper into truths that have been hidden from you, let me know you're still with me. Because what comes next about those 200 fallen angels, will explain everything you see happening in our world today. The rabbis had a saying. Enoch saw what Adam saw before the fall. Think about what that means. He had access to pre-corruption reality. He knew how things were supposed to be, and he could see exactly how they went wrong. That's why his testimony was considered too dangerous for ordinary believers. It wasn't that the information was false, it was that it was too true, too revealing, too clear about things that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The 5 books within. What most people don't realize, is that the Book of Enoch isn't just one book. It's actually 5 separate books, each one more shocking than the last, written at different times but all carrying Enoch's revelations about things most humans were never meant to know. Let me break this down for you. The first book, the Book of the Watchers, this is where it all begins. This section tells the story of 200 angels who decided to break the ultimate rule. They came down to earth, took human women as wives, and completely corrupted the genetic line of humanity. But here's what's terrifying, these weren't just any angels, these were high-ranking members of God's heavenly council, each with specific knowledge and powers, and they gave that knowledge to humans who weren't ready for it. The second book, the Book of Parables, reads like a prophetic preview of the end times. Enoch describes the Son of Man, the final judgment, and details about the Messiah that won't show up in canonical scripture for centuries. How did he know this? Then you have the astronomical book, and this one will blow your mind. Written thousands of years before Copernicus. Enoch describes the movements of celestial bodies with scientific accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. He talks about the solar year being 364 days, the lunar calendar, star movements, like he had access to cosmic knowledge. The fourth section, the Book of Dreams, contains 2 major visions. One covers world history from Adam to the Maccabean period, told through the symbolism of animals. It's like watching a prophetic movie of human civilization, including details about events that hadn't happened yet when it was written. And finally, the Epistle of Enoch. This is Enoch's final warning to future generations. It's addressed specifically to the righteous who will be living in the last days. Sound familiar? Here's what makes this incredible, each book confirms and builds on the others, creating a complete picture of spiritual reality that the official Bible only gives you glimpses of. It's like having the director's cut of biblical history. Pause for a second and ask yourself, what if everything you were taught about angels was incomplete? What if the sanitized version you learned in Sunday school was just the beginning of a much larger, much more complex story? Because when you read these 5 books together, you realize that humanity's problems didn't start with a simple choice about fruit. They started when celestial beings broke cosmic law, and introduced knowledge and genetics into our world that were never supposed to be here. The Watcher's book alone names 20 of these fallen angels, gives you their specific areas of expertise, tells you exactly what forbidden knowledge each one taught. It's like having a detailed intelligence report on enemy operations. And here's the kicker, these 5 books were considered so dangerous, that by the 4th century, church councils made sure they disappeared from official Christian teaching. But they kept copies, locked away in places like Ethiopia, waiting for the right time to resurface. That time might be right now. The original sin story. Genesis mentions the sons of God in just a few verses. But Enoch gives us the full story, and once you hear it, you'll understand why everything in our world feels so fundamentally broken. Most people think the fall of humanity started with Adam and Eve eating forbidden fruit. But that's just chapter 1. The real corruption, the event that changed everything, happened when 200 angels looked down at human women and made a decision that shattered the cosmic order. Genesis 6 verse 2 gives you the sanitized version. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. That's it, just a couple of verses, no details, no explanation, no consequences. But Enoch. Enoch tells you their names. Semjaza was their leader, the one who convinced the others to take the oath. Then there was Azazel, who taught humans to make weapons of war. Kokabel showed them astrology. Barakel taught weather manipulation. Armoros revealed the art of resolving enchantments. These weren't random angels, these were specialists, members of God's inner circle with access to knowledge that was meant to stay in heaven. And they gave it all away for human women. Here's what Genesis doesn't tell you. These angels didn't just marry human women, they genetically altered the human race. Their offspring were giants, the Nephilim, beings with supernatural strength and intelligence, but also an insatiable appetite for violence and corruption. The book describes these giants as consuming everything, not just food, but eventually turning to cannibalism, drinking blood, creating chaos wherever they went. They were hybrids that shouldn't have existed, and they were multiplying. But the real problem wasn't the giants themselves, it was what their fathers had taught humanity. Azazel showed humans how to make swords and knives, shields and armor, the technology of warfare that turned brother against brother. Before this, humans settled disputes with words, not weapons. Other angels revealed the secrets of cosmetics and jewelry. Sounds harmless, right? But Enoch explains this led to vanity, sexual immorality, the corruption of natural beauty into artificial seduction. They taught enchantments and root cutting, what we might call pharmaceutical knowledge and magic, giving humans power over nature they weren't mature enough to handle responsibly. And here's the part that should terrify you, they revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven. Think about what that means, classified information from the throne room of God, leaked to primitive humans by rebellious insiders. Remember when I said church leaders buried this for 1,500 years? You're about to see exactly why, because this story doesn't just explain ancient history, it explains what's happening right now. The result of this cosmic treason? The earth became so corrupted, so violent, so far from God's original design, that he decided to wash it clean with a flood. But the damage was done. The knowledge was out there, the genetic corruption had spread, and the spiritual realm had been permanently altered. Noah's flood wasn't just about human sin, it was about cleaning up an extraterrestrial contamination event, removing hybrid beings that weren't supposed to exist, and trying to preserve a pure human bloodline through Noah's family. But here's what keeps me up at night. Enoch says this will happen again. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. What if we're living in those days right now? The 200 who descended. Picture Mount Hermon, a towering peak that stretches over 9,000 feet above sea level, dividing ancient Israel from Syria. This wasn't just any mountain. This was ground zero for the most devastating rebellion in cosmic history. Enoch tells us exactly what happened there, and when you understand the details, you'll realize this wasn't some impulsive decision by lovesick angels. This was a calculated military operation against heaven itself. 200 angels gathered on that mountain, each one a member of the Watchers, the elite surveillance force of heaven. These weren't low-ranking messengers. These were high command officers with direct access to God's throne room, and they were about to commit the ultimate act of treason. But here's what makes this absolutely chilling. They made a pact, an oath, binding themselves together in this rebellion, because they knew, every single one of them knew, there was no coming back from what they were about to do. Semjaza, their leader, made them swear the oath because he was terrified of backing out alone. He said, "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." Think about that. Even the leader of this rebellion knew he was about to cross a line that would damn him forever. But he was so consumed with desire for human women that he was willing to take 199 angels down with him. And they all agreed. Every single one, bound by an oath that sealed their fate. But why human women? Why would beings of pure spirit, who had access to the glories of heaven, risk eternal damnation for physical relationships with mortals? Here's what Enoch reveals, and this is where it gets disturbing. These angels had been watching humanity develop, studying them, becoming obsessed with their physical forms, their emotions, their capacity for things angels couldn't experience. The women weren't just beautiful, they represented something these angels had never encountered: innocence mixed with sensuality, mortality that made every moment precious, the ability to create life through physical union. Angels are eternal, unchanging, they don't grow, don't learn through experience the way humans do. But humans were dynamic, passionate, capable of transformation. And these angels became addicted to watching that process. These weren't random acts of rebellion. This was a coordinated assault on God's creation. A systematic plan to corrupt the human race at the genetic level, to steal what made humanity unique, and to claim it for themselves. Mount Hermon became their staging ground. The name literally means, devoted to destruction, and that's exactly what they accomplished. They descended from that mountain like an invading army, each with their target, each with their specialty, each carrying forbidden knowledge that would poison human civilization for millennia. But here's the part that should make your blood run cold. Enoch says they didn't just descend once. The book describes multiple waves of corruption, different groups of fallen angels arriving at different times, like a sustained campaign of infiltration. And the location wasn't random. Mount Hermon sits at the intersection of three ancient kingdoms, a perfect position to spread their influence across multiple civilizations simultaneously. They chose their landing site strategically, like any good military operation. The oath they swore bound them not just to rebellion, but to mutual destruction. They became covenant partners in the corruption of God's creation. And once that pact was sealed, there was no forgiveness possible, no path back to heaven, no redemption. They had chosen to become gods of this world, ruling through the hybrid children they would create, and the forbidden knowledge they would spread, turning humanity into their worshippers, their slaves, their genetic experiments. That mountain still stands today, a monument to the moment when heaven's elite guard became hell's commanding officers. The leaders of rebellion. Now let me introduce you to the masterminds, the fallen angels whose names have been deliberately scrubbed from religious education, because knowing who they are, and what they taught, reveals too much about how our world really works. First, Semjaza, the ringleader, the one who orchestrated this entire cosmic coup. His name literally means, name of God, which tells you everything about his original position in heaven's hierarchy. This wasn't some minor functionary, this was someone with direct access to the throne room, someone who knew God's name, and decided to use that knowledge for rebellion. Semjaza was the politician of the group, the one who convinced 199 other high-ranking angels to join his insurrection. He understood power structures, knew how to build coalitions, how to make others complicit in his schemes so they couldn't back out. Sound familiar? But if Semjaza was the politician, Azazel was the weapons dealer. Azazel taught humans how to make swords, knives, shields, armor, every instrument of war that has spilled blood from that day to this. Before Azazel's intervention, humans settled conflicts through words, negotiation, community justice. After his lessons, brother killed brother with metal forged in hell's curriculum. But here's the twisted part. Azazel didn't just teach warfare, he taught vanity. He showed women how to paint their faces, how to adorn themselves with jewelry, how to use beauty as a weapon of seduction. He corrupted both the masculine and feminine, turning men into killers and women into temptresses. The ancient rabbis said Azazel was so evil, so fundamentally corrupted, that on the Day of Atonement, they would literally cast lots and send one goat to Azazel in the wilderness, carrying the sins of Israel away from the people. He became the scapegoat, the one who bears blame, because his influence was that pervasive. Then you have Barakiel, the teacher of astrology. His name means, lightning of God, and he took the knowledge of heavenly signs, celestial movements, divine timing, and turned it into fortune-telling, horoscopes, the worship of created things instead of the Creator. Think about this, before Barakiel's corruption, humans looked at the stars and saw God's handiwork. After his teaching, they started believing the stars controlled their destiny, that their fate was written in cosmic movements rather than their relationship with their Creator. He turned worship into superstition. And Kokabel, master of constellations, whose name means, Star of God. He revealed the secret knowledge of how celestial bodies influence earthly events. But not for good. He taught humans to read the stars for power, for manipulation, for predicting when to launch wars, when to make alliances, when to destroy enemies. These four weren't just teachers, they were department heads in a university of corruption. Each one took their heavenly expertise, their divine knowledge, and weaponized it against humanity. But here's what's absolutely terrifying. Enoch lists 20 of these fallen angel leaders by name, each with their specific area of corruption. It's like having the organizational chart of a supernatural crime syndicate, with detailed job descriptions of how they systematically destroyed human civilization. And these weren't freelancers working independently, this was coordinated, specialized, efficient. Like a supernatural tech transfer program, downloading advanced knowledge into primitive minds that couldn't handle the responsibility that came with it. The result? Humanity suddenly had access to metallurgy, astronomy, cosmetics, warfare, magic, pharmacology, all at once, without the wisdom, the moral development, the spiritual maturity to use these gifts properly. It was like giving nuclear weapons to toddlers. The knowledge was real, the power was immense, but the recipients were completely unprepared for the consequences. And the worst part? These fallen angels knew exactly what would happen. They knew their gifts would corrupt, destroy, damn the very humans they claimed to love. But they gave the knowledge anyway, because their real goal was never to help humanity, it was to recruit worshippers, to build their own kingdom, to become gods of this world. The forbidden knowledge. Here's what they taught humanity that we were never supposed to know, and once you understand these specific technologies, you'll see their fingerprints all over our modern world. Let's start with metallurgy. Before the fallen angels arrived, humans used stone tools, wood, bone, natural materials that required skill but not advanced chemistry. Then Azazel showed them how to extract metals from rock, how to smelt, how to forge, how to create alloys. Sounds like progress, right? But here's the thing, the first metals they learned to work weren't for farming tools or construction, they were for weapons. Swords that could cut through flesh like it was paper. Spearheads that could pierce armor. Knives designed specifically for killing other humans. Before this knowledge, warfare was limited, brutal but not efficient. After metallurgy, humans could kill each other on an industrial scale. The technology of death became the foundation of civilization. But metallurgy was just the beginning. The fallen angels taught cosmetics, and this wasn't about simple beauty enhancement. Enoch specifically mentions eye paint, face painting, the coloring of eyelids. This was about transformation, about changing your natural appearance to deceive, to seduce, to manipulate. Think about what this really means. These angels took women who were created in God's image, and taught them to hide that image behind artificial masks. They turned natural beauty into a tool of corruption. They made women believe they weren't enough as God made them. And the men? They became obsessed with these artificial standards, unable to appreciate the authentic beauty of creation. The angels had successfully corrupted both the pursued and the pursuer. Then came astronomy and divination. Barakiel revealed the movements of celestial bodies, but not for navigation or agriculture, for fortune-telling, for predicting the future, for believing that stars controlled human destiny instead of God. This wasn't science, this was spiritual prostitution, taking the wonder of God's creation and turning it into a substitute religion. Instead of looking at the stars and worshipping their creator, humans started worshipping the creation itself. But perhaps the most dangerous knowledge was sorcery and root-cutting, what we might call pharmacology and chemistry. The angels taught humans which plants could alter consciousness, which roots could poison, which combinations could heal or harm. This sounds beneficial until you realize what it actually produced: the ability to manipulate the mind, to create dependencies, to control behavior through chemical means. They gave humans the power to alter reality through substances, opening doors to spiritual realms that should have remained closed. And here's something that will shock you: they taught humans how to write. Wait, isn't writing good? Isn't literacy progress? Not when the first things written down were spells, incantations, magical formulas, instructions for contacting spiritual beings. The written word became a vehicle for preserving and spreading corruption across generations. Before writing, dangerous knowledge died with the person who held it. After writing, it could be preserved, copied, distributed, passed down through secret societies and mystery schools. The fallen angels had created a permanent archive of forbidden information. But the most terrifying part is that Enoch says these angels revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, classified information from God's throne room, knowledge about the structure of reality that humans weren't ready to handle. Think about our world today. We have weapons that can destroy entire cities. Cosmetics industries built on making people dissatisfied with how God made them. Astronomy mixed with New Age spirituality that worships creation instead of creator. Pharmaceutical companies that profit from chemical dependency. Written knowledge that spreads faster than wisdom. Every single area of progress that the fallen angels introduced has become a source of corruption in our modern world. We've built entire civilizations on the foundation they laid, and we wonder why everything feels so broken. Here's what keeps me up at night: if these technologies were forbidden in ancient times, if teaching them was considered an act of cosmic treason, what does that say about the world we've built on their foundation? We're not just using tools, we're continuing their rebellion, perpetuating the same corruption they started, and most people have no idea they're participating in an ancient war against heaven. What part of this forbidden knowledge do you think had the biggest impact on humanity? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. The Nephilim giants. What happened when immortal angels mated with mortal women was an abomination that defied every law of creation. The offspring weren't human, they weren't angel, they were something that should never have existed, and they nearly destroyed the world. The Book of Enoch doesn't just mention giants, it gives you the horrifying details. These Nephilim grew to heights of 450 feet. Think about that for a second. These weren't just tall people, these were living skyscrapers with human intelligence and angelic power, walking across ancient landscapes like monsters from your worst nightmare. But size was just the beginning of the problem. These giants had appetites that no earthly ecosystem could satisfy. Enoch describes them consuming everything, all the crops, all the livestock, emptying entire regions of food. But here's where it gets absolutely terrifying: when they ran out of animals to eat, they started eating humans. And when they ran out of humans, they started eating each other. Picture this: beings the size of buildings, with supernatural strength, hunting down entire communities like we might hunt rabbits, turning human civilization into their personal buffet. The terror must have been unimaginable. But cannibalism wasn't their only corruption. These hybrids were sexually violent on a scale that defied comprehension. They took human women by force, not just dozens, but hundreds each, treating human beings like livestock for their pleasure. Their angelic heritage gave them power, but their corrupted nature made them use that power for evil. The giants weren't just physically monstrous, they were spiritually polluted. Each one carried the genetic corruption of their fallen angel fathers, mixed with human DNA in ways that created entirely new forms of evil. They were living violations of creation itself. And here's what makes this absolutely chilling: they multiplied fast. Enoch describes them spreading across the earth like a plague, each generation more violent, more corrupt, more removed from anything resembling humanity. But the corruption didn't stop with the giants themselves. Their very existence poisoned everything around them. The earth itself became defiled, the natural order broke down, violence became the norm instead of the exception. Genesis 6 verse 11 gives you a glimpse of the result. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. But that's just the summary. Enoch shows you the details: a world where rape, murder, cannibalism, and genetic abomination had become daily reality. The giants created a culture of might makes right, where the strong devoured the weak without conscience, where human life had no value, where survival meant either serving these monsters or becoming their next meal. It was hell on earth, literally. And their fathers, the fallen angels, they were proud of their work. They had successfully turned God's beautiful creation into a nightmare factory, producing hybrid offspring that worshipped them as gods, while terrorizing the few remaining pure humans into submission. The violence we see in our world today, the senseless brutality, the way some humans seem to have lost all conscience, what if it all traces back to this moment? What if the corruption introduced by these giants never fully left the human bloodline? Because here's what Enoch reveals that should make your blood run cold: not all the giants died in the flood. Some survived, their corrupt DNA mixed into post-flood humanity, their violent nature passed down through generations like a spiritual virus. And Jesus himself confirmed this. He said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." What if we're seeing that prophecy fulfilled right now? What if the violence, the corruption, the complete breakdown of moral boundaries we see today, is history repeating itself? The giants weren't just ancient history, they were a preview of what happens when the line between heaven and earth gets crossed, when supernatural beings corrupt human genetics, when the natural order gets violated on a massive scale. And if Enoch is right, if these beings are returning, if we're really living in the days of Noah, then what we're seeing in our world today isn't just random human evil, it's the resurgence of an ancient corruption, the return of the Nephilim spirit, preparing the world for another cosmic invasion. The archangels intervene. But heaven wasn't silent while earth burned. 4 archangels: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, were watching the corruption unfold, and what they witnessed made them cry out to the throne of God with voices that shook the foundations of eternity. Picture this scene. The most powerful beings in heaven, warriors who had never known defeat, looking down at earth and seeing abominations that defied every law of creation. Giants devouring humans like cattle, fallen angels teaching humans to summon demons, the very DNA of God's masterpiece being corrupted beyond recognition. These weren't just any angels reporting back to headquarters. These were the inner circle, the generals of heaven's armies. Michael, the warrior prince who leads God's forces. Gabriel, the messenger who delivers God's most important communications. Raphael, the healer, and Uriel, whose name means fire of God. And they were horrified. Enoch records their words, their actual report to the Most High. Listen to this. The spirits of souls made application to us, saying, "Bring our cause before the Most High, for we cannot endure this lawless age." The souls of murdered humans were crying out for justice. The earth itself was groaning under the weight of corruption. Creation was begging for intervention, and these 4 archangels became heaven's investigating committee. But here's what's chilling about their report. They didn't just describe what was happening, they named names. They pointed out specific fallen angels, detailed their crimes, listed their victims. It was like a cosmic indictment, a divine intelligence report, documenting every act of rebellion for the final judgment. Michael reported on Semjaza and his followers, how they had corrupted human women, produced giant offspring, taught violence and warfare. Gabriel described the work of Azazel, his weapons training, his corruption of beauty into vanity. Raphael documented the sorcery, the root cutting, the spiritual pollution. And Uriel reported on the astronomical corruption, the divination, the worship of created things instead of the Creator. Their report wasn't just factual, it was passionate. These archangels were angry, not the petty anger humans feel, but righteous indignation at seeing God's perfect creation systematically destroyed by beings who should have known better. And then, the Most High responded. The judgment pronounced was swift, comprehensive, and terrifying. To Uriel, go to the watchers of heaven who have deserted the lofty sky, and tell them, you have been in heaven, but the secrets had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women, and through these secrets women and men work much evil on earth. To Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert which is in Dudiel, and cast him therein, place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever. To Gabriel, proceed against the bastards, and the reprobates, and against the children of fornication, and destroy the children of the watchers from amongst men, send them one against the other that they may destroy each other in battle. And to Michael, the most terrifying command of all. Go, bind Semjaza and his associates, and when their sons have slain one another, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment. This wasn't just punishment, this was cosmic surgery, removing a cancer that threatened to destroy all of creation. But notice something crucial, the judgment wasn't just for them, it was for 70 generations, and for the day of their judgment. The archangels weren't just dealing with an ancient crisis, they were implementing a plan that would span all of human history, right up until the final judgment, which means this story isn't over, not by a long shot. Because if you do the math, 70 generations from the time of Enoch, brings us right to our current era. The same archangels who witnessed the first corruption, who reported to the Most High about the first invasion, are watching our world right now, and they're preparing to make another report. The binding of the watchers. What happened next was swift and terrible. The archangels didn't waste time with negotiations or appeals. They moved like a cosmic SWAT team, each one carrying out their specific orders with precision that shook the foundations of the earth. Raphael went after Azazel first, the weapons instructor, the one who had taught humans to forge instruments of death. Enoch describes the scene with chilling detail. Azazel was bound hand and foot, dragged to a desolate place called Dudiel, and buried alive under jagged rocks in complete darkness. But this wasn't just imprisonment, this was a preview of eternal judgment. Azazel would remain conscious, aware, experiencing the weight of those rocks, the crushing darkness, for thousands of years, all while knowing that his final punishment was still coming. Think about the psychological torture, an immortal being, trapped in a stone tomb, unable to move, unable to see, unable to die, counting every second until Judgment Day. That's not just punishment, that's cosmic horror. Meanwhile, Gabriel was unleashing a different kind of justice on the giants. Instead of directly destroying them, he turned them against each other. The very beings who had terrorized humanity, who had consumed entire populations, suddenly found themselves in civil war. Picture the carnage. 450-foot giants battling each other with supernatural strength, each one trying to survive by destroying their own brothers. The earth shook with their conflicts, their blood flowed like rivers, and humanity finally got to watch their tormentors tear each other apart. But the most terrifying fate was reserved for Semjaza and the other leaders. Michael bound them in the valleys of the earth, not just for a few centuries, but for 70 generations, until the day of final judgment. These weren't ordinary prisons. These were dimensional holding cells, places where time moves differently, where the fallen angels exist in a state of conscious suspension, aware of their fate, able to influence the world through their followers, but unable to directly manifest their power. Remember those forbidden arts they taught? Heaven's response tells us exactly how dangerous that knowledge really was. The punishment wasn't just about disobedience, it was about cosmic treason, about introducing information that could destroy the natural order. Here's what makes their punishment so severe. These angels didn't just break rules, they violated the fundamental structure of reality. They crossed boundaries that were never meant to be crossed, mixed realms that were supposed to remain separate, and gave humans access to forces they couldn't control. It's like giving nuclear launch codes to children. The knowledge itself becomes a weapon, capable of destroying not just individuals but entire civilizations. And once that knowledge is out there, it spreads, mutates, gets passed down through secret societies and mystery schools. But here's what should terrify you about this binding: it wasn't permanent elimination, it was temporary containment. The fallen angels are still alive, still conscious, still planning, still influencing human events through their human descendants and followers. They're like cosmic criminals in maximum security prison, counting down the days until their sentence expires, and according to Enoch's timeline, that day is approaching fast. The binding was supposed to last 70 generations from the time of the flood. Do the math, that brings us right into our current era. Which means the supernatural beings who corrupted the world once before, who introduced forbidden knowledge that nearly destroyed humanity, are about to be released. And they've had thousands of years in prison to plan their revenge. But there's something else, something that makes this even more disturbing. While the leaders are bound, their knowledge survived, passed down through human lineages, preserved in secret texts, maintained by organizations that worship these imprisoned angels as gods. The technology they taught, the spiritual practices they introduced, the genetic corruption they started, none of that died with the flood. It went underground, evolved, adapted, and now it's more powerful than ever. We're not just dealing with ancient history, we're living in the shadow of their influence, using technologies they taught, participating in systems they designed, worshipping ideologies they created, all while their release date gets closer and closer. The binding of the Watchers wasn't the end of the story, it was just intermission. The flood revelation. Long before the first raindrop fell, long before Noah heard God's voice telling him to build an ark, Enoch had already seen it all. The coming deluge wasn't a surprise to heaven, it was a carefully planned rescue operation, the only way to save humanity from complete extinction. Enoch describes his vision with terrifying clarity. He saw the earth covered with water, not just flooded, but completely submerged, every mountain, every valley, every place where the giants had walked and the corruption had spread, washed clean like a surgeon removing cancer. But this wasn't divine anger, this was divine mercy. Most people think the flood was about human wickedness. But Enoch reveals it was about preserving humanity from complete genetic corruption. God wasn't destroying the world in wrath. He was saving it from total annihilation. Here's what Enoch shows us that Genesis only hints at. By the time of the flood, pure human DNA was almost extinct. The Nephilim hybrids had been breeding with humans for generations, spreading their corrupted genetics like a virus through the bloodline. If God had waited much longer, there wouldn't have been any truly human humans left to save. The entire species would have been genetically modified by fallen angel DNA, turning humanity into something else entirely, something that could never be redeemed, because it wouldn't really be human anymore. That's why Noah was chosen, not because he was morally perfect, but because he was genetically pure. Genesis 6 verse 9 says Noah was perfect in his generations. That word perfect in Hebrew is tamian, which means complete, without defect, genetically intact. Noah wasn't just a good man, he was one of the last unmixed humans on earth. His family line had somehow stayed free from Nephilim contamination. They were the preserve, the backup copy, the remnant seed that could restart the human race according to its original design. But here's what makes this absolutely incredible. Enoch reveals that God showed Noah the vision too. Not just instructions about building a boat, but the full picture, the cosmic reason for the flood, the genetic crisis that required such drastic intervention. Noah understood he wasn't just saving animals, he was preserving the blueprint for every species, making sure that when the waters receded, life could restart according to God's original specifications, without the corruption, without the hybrid contamination, without the Nephilim mutations. The ark wasn't just a boat, it was a genetic preservation facility, a floating laboratory designed to restart life on Earth with clean DNA. Every animal, every bird, every creeping thing, carefully selected for genetic purity. And Noah's family, they were the human specimens, the last pure samples of what God originally created when he made Adam and Eve. They carried the original code, the unmodified genome, the authentic human template. But Enoch reveals something else that should make you pause. The flood didn't just destroy the giants, it created a reset point, a new beginning, a chance for humanity to start over without the corrupted knowledge, without the fallen angel influence, without the genetic pollution. For a brief moment in history, humans were free. The Watchers were bound, the Nephilim were dead, the forbidden knowledge was lost. It was like hitting a cosmic reset button. But here's the terrifying part. Enoch also saw what would happen next. He knew the corruption would return, because the spiritual realm hadn't changed, the fallen angels were imprisoned, not eliminated, and their influence would find new ways to manifest. The flood bought humanity time, but it didn't solve the fundamental problem. The war between heaven and hell was still raging, and earth was still the battlefield. Noah and his family stepped off that ark carrying two things, the pure genetic code of original humanity, and the memory of what corruption looks like when it takes hold. They were both the solution and the warning, the fresh start and the cautionary tale. And according to Enoch, we're living in the echo of that moment. The same forces that corrupted the pre-flood world are active again, the same genetic manipulation, the same forbidden knowledge, the same spiritual rebellion. The question is, do we have another Noah? Is there still pure human DNA to preserve? Or have we already passed the point of no return? The Son of Man vision. What Enoch saw next defied every category of human experience. He was transported into the very throne room of the Most High, not as a vision, not as a dream, but as an actual witness to scenes that wouldn't unfold on earth for thousands of years. Picture this. A man who had lived only 6 generations from Adam, standing in the presence of the Ancient of Days, watching the cosmic courtroom where the fate of all creation would be decided. It was like being given a preview of the end of the movie while the opening credits were still rolling. Enoch describes the throne itself, made of crystal and fire, surrounded by thousands upon thousands of angels, each one blazing with light that would blind mortal eyes. The sound of their worship was like rushing water, like thunder, like the voice of the Almighty echoing through infinite space. But then Enoch saw something that changed everything. A figure approaching the throne, someone he calls the Son of Man. This wasn't an angel, wasn't a created being, but somehow both human and divine, carrying authority that made even the seraphim fall silent. And here's what's absolutely staggering. Enoch was seeing the Messiah, centuries before Abraham was born, millennia before David was king, thousands of years before the incarnation. He was witnessing the cosmic coronation that would determine the future of humanity. The Son of Man received dominion, glory, a kingdom. All peoples, nations, languages, would serve him. His dominion would be everlasting. His kingdom would never be destroyed. Enoch was watching the investiture ceremony for Earth's true king. But the vision went deeper. Enoch saw the judgment. He watched as the Son of Man separated the righteous from the wicked, saw the resurrection of the dead, witnessed the final defeat of the fallen angels who had corrupted his world. Think about what this means. While the Nephilim giants were terrorizing the earth, while the fallen angels were teaching forbidden knowledge, while humanity was spiraling toward extinction, God was showing his faithful servant the ultimate resolution, the final victory, the moment when all wrongs would be made right. Enoch saw Azazel, the weapon's teacher, cast into the lake of fire. He witnessed Semjaza and the other watchers brought before the throne for final judgment. He watched as every act of rebellion, every moment of corruption, every drop of innocent blood, was accounted for and punished. But he also saw something beautiful. The righteous dead, raised to new life, transformed, glorified, given bodies that could never be corrupted, never be injured, never die. They would inherit the earth that the fallen angels had tried to steal. And here's the part that should make you weep. Enoch saw that this Son of Man, this divine judge, this cosmic king, would accomplish what the flood could not: permanent victory over the forces of corruption, final restoration of God's original design. But why were these visions considered too sacred for ordinary believers? Because Enoch was seeing the playbook, the divine strategy, the detailed plan for how God would ultimately defeat evil. This wasn't just prophecy, this was classified intelligence from the war room of heaven. Early church leaders feared that if people read these visions, they might become complacent, thinking the outcome was already decided so their choices didn't matter. Or worse, they might become presumptuous, assuming they knew God's timeline and trying to force prophetic events to happen. But there was another reason these visions were suppressed. They revealed that the Messiah would come not just as a suffering servant, but as a conquering king, not just to forgive sins, but to destroy enemies, not just to save souls, but to judge the fallen angels and their human followers with absolute finality. That's a different Jesus than most churches wanted to preach. A Messiah who would return with armies of angels, who would bind Satan himself, who would rule with an iron rod, who would show no mercy to those who had corrupted his creation. Enoch's visions showed that the gentle lamb would become a roaring lion, and that transformation would be terrifying for anyone standing on the wrong side of history. The Son of Man that Enoch saw wasn't just coming to invite people to church. He was coming to end the war between heaven and hell, permanently, decisively, with overwhelming force. And according to Enoch's timeline, that day is closer than most people think. The judgment of the watchers. Enoch is taken on a terrifying journey to witness their final punishment, and what he saw in that place will haunt you long after this video ends. The angel guiding Enoch brought him to a location that defies human description, a prison designed specifically for supernatural beings, not built with stone or metal, but carved from the very fabric of reality itself, a place where fallen angels await their final judgment in conscious torment. Imagine descending into a cosmic dungeon where the screams aren't just sounds, they're the tortured cries of beings who once stood in God's presence, who once knew perfect joy, and now experience perfect despair. Enoch described seeing the watchers in chains, but these weren't physical restraints, these were spiritual bonds that held immortal beings in positions of helpless agony. They could think, they could feel, they could remember what they had lost, but they couldn't move, couldn't escape, couldn't die. Some of them were suspended over pits of fire, not burning, because they couldn't be destroyed, but experiencing the heat, the pain, the terror of what awaited them at the final judgment. Others were bound in complete darkness, cut off from all light, all hope, all contact with anything good or beautiful. But here's what makes this scene absolutely heartbreaking. These fallen angels recognized Enoch. They knew who he was, they knew he had access to God, and they begged him to intercede for them. Picture these once mighty beings, former members of heaven's elite guard, now reduced to pleading with a human for mercy. They asked Enoch to write a petition, to present their case before the throne, to ask for forgiveness they knew they didn't deserve. And Enoch, out of compassion, agreed to try. He wrote their petition, presented it before the Most High, and waited for an answer. But when the response came, it wasn't what anyone wanted to hear. The answer was no. Final, absolute, irreversible, no. If this is hitting you differently than anything you've heard in church, if you're starting to realize that biblical reality is far more complex and terrifying than you were taught, you're not alone. Many people are waking up to truths that have been hidden for centuries. God explained to Enoch why forgiveness was impossible. These angels hadn't just made a mistake, they had fundamentally altered their nature, corrupted their essence, violated cosmic law in ways that couldn't be undone. They had taken immortal spirits and bound them to mortal flesh, mixed divine knowledge with human rebellion, created hybrid offspring that should never have existed. Their crime wasn't just disobedience, it was cosmic vandalism, the deliberate destruction of God's perfect design. But the most chilling part of God's response was what he revealed about their future. These watchers would remain in torment, not for a limited time, not until they learned their lesson, but until the day of the great judgment, and then, eternal fire. Enoch watched as his petition was consumed, burned up, rejected completely. There would be no second chances, no rehabilitation program, no possibility of redemption. The line had been crossed, and there was no way back. The angel guiding Enoch explained something that should terrify every human alive. These fallen watchers had been given perfect knowledge, perfect environment, perfect relationship with God, and they had chosen rebellion anyway. There was no excuse, no justification, no circumstance that could explain away their choice. If beings with that level of privilege and access could fall so completely, what hope did corrupted humanity have? But then, in the midst of this cosmic horror, Enoch received a revelation that changed everything. The same Son of Man he had seen receiving dominion, would one day descend to earth, not as judge, but as Savior, taking on human flesh, experiencing human limitation, providing the redemption that the fallen angels could never receive. The Watchers chose corruption, but humanity would be offered salvation. The angels who fell could never rise again, but humans who fell could be lifted up. Because the Son of Man would bridge the gap they had created, restore the connection they had severed, heal the damage they had done. Enoch left that prison knowing two things. Justice is real, and mercy is possible, but only for those who choose it while they still can. The resurrection and final kingdom. But Enoch's visions weren't all darkness and judgment. In the midst of cosmic horror, he was shown something so beautiful, so hope-filled, that it would sustain the righteous through every generation of suffering that followed. The resurrection of the dead. Enoch describes watching the earth give up its secrets, graves opening, bodies emerging, but not the broken, corrupted, diseased bodies that had been buried. These were transformed, glorified, incorruptible, more real and solid than anything that had ever existed before. The righteous dead weren't just coming back to life, they were coming back to life plus, with capabilities that made the fallen angels' gifts look like parlor tricks. They had bodies that could never be injured, minds that could comprehend divine mysteries, hearts that were incapable of corruption. But here's what makes this absolutely incredible. Enoch saw that these resurrected beings wouldn't just be passive inhabitants of some distant heaven. They would inherit this earth, the same planet that had been corrupted by the Watchers, but restored to its original glory, enhanced beyond its original design. The millennial kingdom vision shows Earth as it was always meant to be, where the knowledge that the fallen angels hoarded in secret would be freely available to all, where technology serves love instead of war, where the sciences that were corrupted into magic and manipulation become tools for worship and wonder. Enoch watched as the Son of Man established his throne on earth, not in some ethereal realm, but right here, where the battle had been fought, where the corruption had spread, where humanity had suffered. This world would become the capital of a cosmic kingdom. And the elect, those who had remained faithful during the age of corruption, they weren't just going to be citizens of this kingdom, they were going to participate in its governance. Enoch saw them sitting on thrones, making judgments, ruling alongside the Son of Man. But here's the part that would have blown the minds of early church leaders. The elect weren't just judging humans, they were judging angels. The very beings who had once been worshipped as gods, who had corrupted humanity with forbidden knowledge, who had created the Nephilim hybrids, would be brought before human courts for sentencing. Think about the reversal. Beings who had treated humans like cattle, like experiments, like playthings, would kneel before transformed humans and receive their punishment. The oppressed would become the judges, the victims would pronounce sentence on their tormentors. Enoch describes the fallen angels being dragged before these human tribunals, their crimes read aloud, their victims given the opportunity to testify, their punishments announced with divine authority. It was cosmic justice on a scale that defied imagination. But the kingdom itself, the millennial reign, this wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. Enoch saw the earth producing abundance like never before, deserts blooming, mountains flowing with sweet water, peace between animals that had been enemies since the fall. The knowledge that had been corrupted by the Watchers would be purified. Metallurgy would create tools for building instead of weapons for destroying. Astronomy would reveal God's glory instead of fortune-telling nonsense. Medicine would heal without creating dependency. Writing would preserve truth instead of spreading lies. And the survivors from the old world, the humans who had endured the age of corruption, they would see their children growing up in perfect environment, learning pure knowledge, developing to their full potential without the limitations imposed by fallen angel influence. But here's what made these visions too sacred for ordinary believers. Enoch was seeing the end game, the ultimate purpose behind all the suffering, the reason God allowed the corruption to happen in the first place. It wasn't just about defeating evil, it was about proving that his original design was perfect, that humanity could rule righteously when given the chance, that the fallen angels' claims about human weakness were lies. The elect would become living proof that corruption wasn't inevitable, that given the right environment, the right knowledge, the right leadership, humans could exceed even the angels in wisdom and power. But to see this vision clearly, to understand its full implications, required spiritual maturity that most believers simply didn't possess. It would be like showing advanced calculus to a kindergartner. The information would be accurate but completely overwhelming. So the church leaders made a decision: hide the vision, preserve the mystery, protect people from truth they weren't ready to handle. But what if they were wrong? What if understanding Enoch's vision is exactly what we need right now, as we watch our world spiral toward the same corruption that required divine intervention before? The secrets of creation. What Enoch saw next goes beyond prophecy, beyond visions of judgment and redemption. He was given access to the operating manual of creation itself, the heavenly tablets that contain the blueprints for how the universe actually works. Picture being handed the source code for reality. Not theories, not human observations, but the actual divine specifications for how God designed time, space, celestial movements, the very fabric of existence. Enoch describes being shown tablets made of sapphire and crystal, covered with writing that blazed like fire. These weren't just records, they were the active commands that keep the universe running, the software that governs every star, every planet, every cycle of time. And what was written on those tablets should revolutionize how you think about everything. The sun doesn't just rise and set randomly, it follows precise pathways written in heaven before the foundation of the world. Enoch saw 12 gates in the east, 12 gates in the west, and the sun moving through each one according to a divine schedule that never varies, not by a second, not by a degree. The moon follows its own set of celestial highways, waxing and waning according to patterns that reflect deeper spiritual realities. Each phase corresponds to specific aspects of God's character. His mercy, His judgment, His faithfulness, His sovereignty. But here's where it gets mind-blowing. Enoch reveals that the year isn't 365 days, it's 364 days, exactly, no leap years, no adjustments, no human calculations needed. The divine calendar is perfect, precise, unchanging. Think about what this means. Our entire modern calendar system, the way we measure seasons, track holy days, calculate time itself, it's all been corrupted, shifted away from God's original design. We're living out of sync with creation's rhythm. What if our entire understanding of time and seasons has been corrupted since the beginning? What if the calendar we use, the way we mark sacred days, the timing of religious festivals, it's all slightly off from what God intended? Enoch was shown that every celestial body has a purpose beyond just giving light. The stars aren't just decorations scattered across the night sky, they're signs, markers, divine communications written in light across the cosmos. Each constellation tells part of God's story, each movement announces heavenly events. But the fallen angels had corrupted this knowledge. They took the pure science of astronomy and twisted it into astrology. They convinced humans that stars controlled destiny instead of simply announcing it. They turned worship of the Creator into worship of the creation. The heavenly tablets showed Enoch the difference. Real astronomy reveals God's glory, His precision, His artistic beauty, His power over time and space. Corrupted astronomy makes humans slaves to cosmic forces, believers in fate instead of faith, worshippers of creation instead of Creator. And the calendar corruption wasn't accidental. By shifting human understanding of time, the fallen angels could interfere with divine appointments, make people miss the seasons God had established, throw off the timing of prophetic events, create confusion about when the Messiah would appear. Enoch saw that God's original calendar contained hidden meanings. Each month, each week, each day was designed to teach spiritual truths, to create rhythms of worship, to prepare humanity for specific revelations at specific times. But we lost it. The flood washed away the stone markers, the written records, the human memory of how time was supposed to work. And when civilization restarted, humans had to guess, creating calendars based on incomplete observations, missing the deeper patterns, the spiritual significance, the divine appointments. The result? We're living in temporal chaos. Our holidays don't align with heaven's celebrations. Our seasons don't match the spiritual cycles God established. Our understanding of prophetic timing is skewed because we're using the wrong clock. But Enoch reveals something that should give you hope. In the last days, when the Son of Man establishes his kingdom, the original calendar will be restored. The heavenly tablets will be opened. The true rhythms of creation will be re-established. Time itself will be healed. And those who have been paying attention, who have been seeking the original patterns, who have been trying to align their lives with God's true timing, they'll finally understand what they've been looking for. The secrets of creation aren't lost forever, they're just hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed, waiting for people who are ready to live according to heaven's schedule instead of earth's corruption. The early church's dilemma. For the first 3 centuries of Christianity, the Book of Enoch wasn't controversial, it was essential. Church fathers quoted from it like they quoted from Genesis, referenced it like they referenced the Psalms, treated it as legitimate scripture that belonged in every believer's library. Justin Martyr, one of the most respected early Christian thinkers, didn't just accept Enoch's account of the fallen angels, he built entire theological arguments on it. He used Enoch to explain why the world was so broken, why demons existed, why humanity needed redemption. It wasn't fringe theology, it was mainstream Christian teaching. Clement of Alexandria, head of the famous catechetical school, regularly cited Enoch in his writings. He saw no contradiction between Enoch's revelations and apostolic teaching. In fact, he believed Enoch provided crucial background information that made the New Testament make more sense. Tertullian, the brilliant legal mind who shaped early Christian doctrine, called Enoch scripture. He argued that since Jude quoted from it, since it provided essential information about angels and demons, since it connected directly to Jesus' teachings about the last days, it obviously belonged in the biblical canon. Irenaeus, the hammer of heretics, the man who fought false teaching wherever he found it, accepted Enoch's account of the Watchers without hesitation. He saw it as the missing piece that explained how evil entered the world, why giants existed, why the flood was necessary. For 300 years, the book was accepted, quoted, taught, considered reliable revelation that helped Christians understand their spiritual warfare, their cosmic context, their role in the ongoing battle between heaven and hell. But then something changed, drastically. By the 4th century, as Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, church leaders started getting nervous. The book was becoming too popular, too influential, too dangerous for the kind of controlled Christianity they wanted to establish. Here's the question that will blow your mind: what if they banned it not because it was false, but because it was too true? What if the information was so accurate, so revealing, so empowering to ordinary believers, that religious authorities couldn't maintain control if people had access to it? Think about what the Book of Enoch actually does. It gives you the names of specific fallen angels, tells you their areas of expertise, shows you how spiritual warfare really works, reveals the cosmic context behind earthly events, provides a timeline for prophetic fulfillment. That's intelligence, not just inspiration. It's like having access to classified files from heaven's war room, understanding the enemy's strategy, knowing the battle plan, recognizing the signs of spiritual attack. But religious authorities wanted dependent congregations, not informed soldiers. They wanted people who came to them for interpretation, not people who could read the spiritual landscape for themselves. They wanted to be the mediators between God and man, not to equip every believer to walk with God like Enoch did. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD began the process, not officially, but through influence, pressure, political maneuvering. The message was clear: books that made the clergy unnecessary were dangerous, texts that gave too much power to individual believers threatened the institutional structure. Jerome, the translator of the Latin Vulgate, refused to include Enoch, claiming it was too difficult to authenticate. But his real concern was stated privately: the book made ordinary Christians too independent, too knowledgeable, too equipped to challenge religious authority. Augustine, the theological giant who shaped Western Christianity, argued that Enoch's revelations were too specific, too detailed, too clear about matters that should remain mysterious. He believed some truths were too dangerous for the masses. But here's what's really disturbing: the same councils that removed Enoch from the biblical canon also removed other books that gave detailed information about angels, demons, spiritual warfare, prophetic timing, practical knowledge that would help believers navigate the last days. It wasn't about protecting doctrine, it was about protecting power. Informed believers are harder to control. People who understand spiritual warfare can't be manipulated through fear. Christians who know prophetic timing can't be deceived about end-times events. By the 5th century, the Book of Enoch had been successfully marginalized in the Western Church, relegated to the category of apocryphal, which really means hidden. They didn't destroy it completely, they just made sure most people would never encounter it. But they couldn't erase it from everywhere. The Ethiopian Church preserved it, the Eastern Orthodox maintained copies. Jewish communities continued studying it. Because they understood what the Western Church forgot: some knowledge is too important to lose, even if it's too dangerous for religious institutions to handle. The theological threats. Let me tell you exactly what terrified church leaders about Enoch's revelations, and why they decided this knowledge was too dangerous for regular believers to possess. First, the angel problem. Enoch didn't just mention angels in general terms like other biblical books. He named them, gave their job descriptions, detailed their specific areas of corruption, provided organizational charts of hell's hierarchy. This created a massive theological headache. If angels had names, personalities, specialties, then dealing with spiritual warfare became specific, tactical, practical. Instead of vague prayers about evil forces, believers could engage in targeted spiritual combat against identified enemies. Church leaders realized that if people knew Azazel specialized in weapons and warfare, Kokabel controlled astrology and divination, Barakiel corrupted weather prediction, then ordinary Christians might start recognizing these influences in their own world, connecting current events to specific fallen angels, understanding spiritual warfare at a level that made clergy seem unnecessary. But the genetic corruption narrative was even more threatening. Enoch's detailed account of angel-human hybridization raised questions that mainstream theology couldn't answer without admitting uncomfortable truths. If fallen angels could alter human DNA, if they produced giant offspring, if genetic corruption was the real reason for the flood, then humanity's problems weren't just moral or spiritual, they were biological, genetic, inherited. This suggested that some humans might carry angelic DNA, that certain bloodlines might be more susceptible to spiritual corruption, that physical appearance might reflect spiritual reality. These weren't safe topics for 4th century church politics. The Roman Empire was trying to unite diverse populations under one religious system. The last thing they needed was biblical texts suggesting that some people were genetically closer to demons than others. And the prophecies, dear God, the prophecies were specific enough to be verifiable. Enoch didn't just predict that a Messiah would come. He described the timeline, the cosmic courtroom, the specific judgments, the millennial kingdom, the resurrection details, the final disposition of earth and heaven. This level of prophetic precision was dangerous because it could be fact-checked. If Enoch's timeline was accurate, if his descriptions matched future events, then his authority as a prophet would be undeniable. But if church leaders were wrong about when or how these events would unfold, their credibility would be shattered. Safer to remove the specific predictions altogether. Keep prophecy vague, mysterious, subject to clerical interpretation. Make sure ordinary believers needed professional theologians to understand what God was planning. But perhaps the most threatening aspect was the advanced knowledge. Enoch's descriptions of celestial mechanics, astronomical precision, calendar systems, scientific understanding that wouldn't be discovered by human civilization for thousands of years. How could a man living 6 generations from Adam know that the solar year was exactly 364 days? How could he describe the paths of celestial bodies with mathematical precision? How could he detail the structure of the universe in ways that matched advanced cosmology? The obvious answer, divine revelation, was too disturbing for institutional Christianity. Because if God gave Enoch such detailed scientific knowledge, why didn't he give similar revelation to church leaders? If ordinary believers could receive direct divine instruction about the workings of creation, what was the purpose of priestly mediation? Enoch represented everything the institutional church feared: direct access to God, specific knowledge about spiritual warfare, detailed understanding of prophecy, scientific revelation that bypassed human learning, personal relationship with heaven that didn't require ecclesiastical approval. The book proved that God could speak directly to individuals, give them classified information, reveal cosmic secrets, provide practical knowledge for navigating spiritual reality, all without going through official religious channels. This wasn't just theologically inconvenient, it was institutionally threatening. If people believed they could walk with God like Enoch did, receive direct revelation like he did, understand spiritual warfare like he did, then what was the point of having a professional clergy class? So they made a decision that would shape Christianity for the next 1,500 years. They declared that the age of direct revelation was over, that God now spoke only through official church channels, that books like Enoch were relics from a different dispensation, interesting historically but irrelevant practically. They convinced people that such intimate relationship with God, such detailed knowledge of spiritual reality, such specific understanding of prophecy, was no longer available, no longer necessary, possibly even dangerous. But what if they were wrong? What if the knowledge in Enoch wasn't meant just for his generation, but preserved specifically for the last generation, the people living in the final days, who would need every advantage in the ultimate spiritual battle? What if removing this book from the biblical canon was like removing the battle manual from an army going to war? The final warning. Daniel the prophet was given a vision that would echo through history. He saw the end times, witnessed the final chapter of human civilization, and received a promise that still gives me chills. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Knowledge shall increase. Think about that for a moment. For most of human history, the sum total of human knowledge doubled every few centuries. Then every few decades. Then every few years. Today, human knowledge doubles every 12 months. In some fields, every few weeks. We're drowning in information, discoveries, technological breakthroughs that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. But here's what Daniel understood that we've forgotten: increasing knowledge isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a warning sign. Enoch saw the same pattern in his vision. The Watchers shared forbidden knowledge with humans, taught them metallurgy, astronomy, warfare, genetic manipulation, cosmetics, abortion, divination. And the result wasn't enlightenment, it was corruption on a scale that demanded divine intervention. The explosion of knowledge in the last days isn't random. It's prophetic fulfillment. We're approaching the same level of dangerous understanding that existed before the flood. Look around you. We can edit genes like editing text. Create artificial intelligence that surpasses human reasoning. Build weapons that could destroy civilization. Manipulate weather patterns. Clone living beings. Upload consciousness to machines. We've reached the point where humans believe they can improve on God's design, transcend natural limitations, achieve immortality through technology, become gods themselves. Sound familiar? That's the same lie that seduced the angels in heaven, the same deception that corrupted humanity in Eden, the same pride that brought judgment in Noah's time. And it's happening again, right now, in our generation. Jesus warned us. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. He wasn't talking about random wickedness. He was describing a specific type of corruption, genetic manipulation, supernatural interference, the kind of evil that requires divine reset. But there are other signs. Daniel described people running to and fro, unprecedented travel, constant motion, restless searching. In the last 50 years, human mobility has exploded beyond anything previous generations could imagine. We can travel anywhere on Earth in less than 24 hours. Most people change locations multiple times per day. We're constantly moving, constantly connected, constantly consuming information, never still, never satisfied. That's not progress, that's prophecy. Enoch described the final generation as having access to all knowledge, but lacking wisdom, possessing great power, but no understanding of consequences, being able to do amazing things, but not knowing whether they should. Does that describe our world? We can split atoms but can't fix our marriages. We can map the human genome but can't solve homelessness. We can travel to space but can't live at peace with our neighbors. We have the knowledge of gods, but the wisdom of children. And the corruption is accelerating. Enoch saw that the final days would be marked by genetic manipulation, by beings that weren't fully human, by the return of hybrid creatures like the Nephilim. We call them designer babies, enhanced humans, cyborgs, artificial intelligence. But Enoch would recognize them immediately. They're the same abominations that necessitated the flood. The signs are everywhere, but most people can't see them because they don't have the interpretive key. They don't understand that current events are fulfilling ancient prophecies, that modern science is repeating ancient sins, that human progress is actually spiritual regression. If you're connecting the dots between ancient prophecy and modern events, let me know in the comments. Type "I see it" if this is all coming together for you. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the pattern, you recognize it everywhere. Once you know what Enoch knew, the world looks completely different. But here's the hope. Enoch also saw the end of the story. He witnessed the judgment of the corrupt beings, the binding of the fallen angels, the restoration of divine order, the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. The same power that saved Noah's family, that preserved the human race, that bound the watchers in chains of darkness, is still active today, still watching, still protecting those who belong to him. But the window is closing. The corruption is reaching critical mass. The knowledge explosion is approaching its peak. The genetic manipulation is becoming irreversible. Enoch's warning isn't just ancient history. It's breaking news. The final chapter is being written, and we're the generation that will see how the story ends. The question is, will you be ready when it happens? Most people will watch this video, feel amazed, maybe even disturbed, and then go back to their regular lives. But you're not most people. You're someone who can handle the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The Book of Enoch wasn't banned because it was heretical. It was banned because it revealed too much about the spiritual war happening all around us. It showed the origins of evil, the reality of supernatural interference in human affairs, and the ultimate victory of righteousness. Every word Enoch wrote has been preserved for this generation, for you, because these are the days when this knowledge matters most. Think about it. For over 1500 years, this book was hidden, suppressed, kept from ordinary believers, dismissed as mythology. But somehow, against all odds, it survived. Ethiopian monks preserved it through centuries of persecution. Jewish scholars maintained copies in secret. Eastern churches protected fragments in hidden libraries. As if invisible hands were ensuring it would be available exactly when humanity needed it most. And that time is now. We're living in the generation that Daniel saw, when knowledge would increase exponentially, when people would run to and fro, when the sealed things would be unsealed. We're witnessing the return of the days of Noah, genetic manipulation on an unprecedented scale, beings that aren't fully human, technology that promises to make humans into gods. We're seeing the fulfillment of Jesus' warning. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. But we're also living in the generation that has access to Enoch's complete intelligence briefing, his detailed account of how this story began, how it unfolds, and how it ends. You now know what the early church fathers knew, what the apostles understood, what church councils tried to hide. You have the missing piece that makes biblical prophecy clear, current events understandable, spiritual warfare tactical. The same fallen angels that corrupted the pre-flood world are active today, using different methods, updated terminology, modern technology, but pursuing the same agenda, the corruption of human genetics, the pollution of God's image in mankind. But you also know how their story ends. Enoch saw their judgment, their binding, their final defeat. He witnessed the Son of Man receiving his kingdom, the establishment of divine justice, the restoration of all things. The battle is real, the stakes are ultimate, but the outcome is certain. If this ancient text has opened your eyes to truths you've never seen before, drop your most powerful takeaway in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights help other truth seekers on this path. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because once you start seeing the connections between ancient prophecy and modern reality, you can't unsee them. The veil has been pulled back, the hidden things are being revealed, the final chapter is being written, and you're not just watching it happen, you're part of the story. Oh, and one more thing. Enoch walked with God, and was translated, taken up without dying, because his faith pleased heaven. His relationship with the Creator was so intimate, so pure, so complete, that death couldn't touch him. That same God, the one who revealed cosmic secrets to Enoch, who preserved his words through millennia of suppression, who made sure you would hear this message today, is calling you to walk with him. Not just to know about spiritual warfare, but to be equipped for it. Not just to understand prophecy, but to live in light of it. Not just to see the corruption, but to be protected from it. The Book of Enoch isn't just information, it's invitation. An invitation to walk so closely with God that you see what he sees, understand what he understands, and participate in his ultimate victory. The question isn't whether you believe what Enoch wrote. The question is whether you're ready to walk where Enoch walked, to know what Enoch knew, to live like someone who understands that this physical world is temporary, but spiritual reality is eternal. The choice is yours, but choose quickly, because the window that preserved Enoch's warnings for this generation might not stay open much longer.